Hello everyone, and welcome back to another GIS lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to continue our discussion on viewing geometry by talking about a way that we can quantify the quality of the viewing geometry. And so if we remember back to the previous video, right, we talked about this idea that we had errors in the calculation of the distance from the satellite, which we visualize as bands around the estimation, right? So that we can be confident, right, that we are somewhere in this range here, as opposed to explicitly being along this circle. And when we applied that out to trilateration, what we got was this idea that, hey, we can no longer predict an exact point. Instead, we predict an area, and we know that we are somewhere in this area. And the idea was that our goal would be to make this area as small as possible. And that one of the ways that we could do that was through viewing geometry. And at the end of the video, right, we sort of talked about the idea that if your satellites are all clustered together, that's bad, right? That's going to lead to a larger area prediction than if we spread the satellites out in space, right? So this was a better viewing geometry because the satellites are more spread out. And again, right, just based on geometry here, right, as we spread these things out farther in space, we reduce the area of overlap given the uncertainty. So all things being equal, right, a better viewing geometry is going to give a better estimate of location than a bad viewing geometry. So how do we know whether our geometry is good or bad, right? It's not really feasible for us to know when we're standing on the ground whether or not our satellites are in this configuration, or something in between. And so what we've done is we've come up with this idea of dilution of precision. Or DOP, D-O-P. And basically what DOP does is DOP is a numeric quantifier, right? It is a quantifiable measure of that viewing geometry. And so the definition of what DOP is it is the ratio of the area of uncertainty I probably misspelled that there, but it's the ratio of the area of uncertainty for the geometry you have relative to the best possible area of uncertainty. Right, so let me say that again. Right, dilution of precision is the ratio of the area of uncertainty for the geometry that you have relative to the best possible area of uncertainty. Okay, so what I want to think about for a second is imagine that we have, right, this shape here, right? And we say this has an area A, right? And so we know that this is the smallest possible area of uncertainty. right? And we know this by mathematical formulas and calculations, right? That given everything we have, this is the best possible case that we could get, right? So then, right, you're out in the field and you're measuring some data and you get your information from your satellites, right? And you find out that your area, right, looks something like this. So this would be area B. Which is the area that you measure with your GPS. Right, so this is theoretical limit. Let me make a note here. Right, so this is theoretical best. Right, and this B here, right, this is real world measure. Right, and again, this area here, this is the measured area of uncertainty. Right, so if I scroll back to our diagram from the previous video for a second here, right, that area that I drew would be this thing here, right? This is the area where you predict you could possibly be in, given the geometry of the satellites, right? And again, we know that, hey, if we move the satellites around, we can change the shape and the area of that prediction. So that little area right there, that is what these areas are. So we know the theoretical best area that we could get, and we know what we actually got, right? We know the area, the predicted area that we have given our GPS and what it just recorded. So what dilution of precision does is dilution of precision says, what is the ratio between what we actually measured and what the theoretical best was, right? This is DOP. Right, what is the ratio between the area that we predict, the area of uncertainty we have, and the theoretical best area that we could have gotten given the constraints of the situation, right? And so DOP is just a ratio. So let's talk about what can happen. Well, right, in the best case scenario, what can happen is that our B equals A, right? The best possible scenario we could have would be that B equals A, right? And in a ratio, if the numerator equals the denominator, we get a value of 1, right? So a value of 1, this is the best. Let's make that a little bit nicer, right? This is the best possible DOP, right? Is that our geometry is the same size as the best geometry possible, okay? That doesn't normally happen. Generally what you want is you want to have a p-DOP or a DOP of less than 5, right? If your DOP is less than 5, this is considered good and you would use it, right? If the DOP is substantially greater than 5, right, this is generally considered bad and you wouldn't want to use it, okay? So just to recap what we've talked about, right, we know based on the GPS measurement, the area of uncertainty, the area that we can predict ourselves to be in, right? We know this area given the constraints of the problem. We also know the theoretical best area that we could get given the constraints. We calculate the ratio between this real world measure and this theoretical measure to give us our DOP. If they're the same, we know we've done the best possible job we can with the viewing geometry. We get a value of 1, right? If it's less than 5, we call it good. If it's more than 5, we generally would not use that measurement. So what I want to end this video on is discussing how do we know, or is there any way that we can predict what a good time would be, right? Because satellites are always moving in space. Is there a way that we can predict what a good time would be to go out to get the best possible DOP for the area that we're trying to collect? And the answer to that is yes. Yes, we can. So we can get DOP in the field, so we know whether or not a particular measurement is of quality. But we can also use online calculators and online tools to figure out, generally speaking, what the best day of the week and what the best time of that day are going to be for a given location to minimize this DOP as much as possible, right? Because we can predict, okay, if we're going to be in, let's say, Miami, Florida, doing some GPS measurements, right? We would know where the satellites are going to be. Again, those are all calculated based on mathematical functions. And so we can say, okay, at noon on Thursday in Miami, Florida, we know that the satellite configuration is going to give us the best possible area relative to the theoretical best, right? That if we go out at noon on a Thursday, we will have the lowest possible dilution of precision, right? Because we are going to be the closest we can be to that theoretical best, meaning our DOP is going to be as close to 1 as we can get it within the time frame that we've given ourselves to work with. So hopefully this makes sense. This idea that dilution of precision is just a ratio of the area that we have due to the errors relative to the area that we could have if we change the viewing geometry a little bit. Hopefully this makes sense. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.